This podcast is a proud member of the Paranormality Podcast Network.
Okay. Show me.
Sometimes that is better.
Welcome to the Prairieland Paranormal Podcast.
Be sure you never, ever scream.
A podcast where we will explore the dark corners of our world, the weird, the creepy, and the strange.
There are no accidents, no coincidences.
I am your host, Eric Carrier.
The boogeyman is real.
And they mostly come at night.
My co-host is Jessica Carrier.
Come out wherever you are.
Thank you for joining us for a journey into the unknown.
Be one of us.
Let's get started with today's show. Hey guys, welcome to the show. This is the Prairieland Paranormal Podcast, and I am your host, Eric Carrier. I am here with, I'm here with no one. Sorry folks, if you are a Jessica fan, you are going to be sorely disappointed this episode because she is completely MIA. But don't worry, all is well. There is no mystery to this. She is simply out west for a few days, helping her sister out who just had twins. She will be back and probably completely wore out for our next episode. Today I will be carrying all the weight and will be leading us down the rabbit hole of vampires. Specifically, I'm going to be discussing vampire history and folklore. We'll be exploring Greek myth to find the origins. We'll take a look at some of history's purported vampires, such as St. Germain, and we'll help you get your vampire hunting kit up to date. If you are a new listener and you are here for the first time, welcome. If you have been around for a while, welcome back. We know that there are a lot of podcasts out there that are competing for your time, and we are grateful that you are giving that time to us. Thank you. If you would like to support our podcast, there are a few ways you can do that. First, you can continue to share the show. This is by far the most important thing that you can do to help the show grow. Let's just be honest. We expect that you will share our show with everybody. Indie shows like ours only survive by word of mouth. Second, you can continue to vote for us on the Paranormality Paranormal Top 25. Please keep voting for us each and every month at paranormalityradio.com. This is amazing and free publicity for our show, and it doesn't hurt at all that we are in the top 4 this month. We are only in this top position because of you, and thank you to all of you who have been voting for us. Third, if you would like to support the show financially, you can support our merch store, which is open and live now on our website. Fourth, if you would like to support a worthy cause, then you can leave us a tip. Those tips will be donated to Operation Underground Railroad. This is an organization that rescues children around the world from sex trafficking and from sexual exploitation. We hope that you will join us in supporting this organization, and to show our support, we will be matching the total donation for the month up to $50. The last way that you can support our show is to come and hang out with us on social media. We have accounts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, and we love to hang out and meet you guys there. All of those accounts and our merch store can be accessed through our website at www.prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. Last, we released our first terabyte this week. We hope that you guys enjoyed that. You can expect short stories like that one every other Tuesday on our off weeks. If you have stories that you would like to submit, you can submit those also through our website. Okay, I don't have anything else, so let's get started with today's show. In 2018, an article started popping up in newspapers around the world. The headline read, "Young blood could be the secret to long-lasting health." And then this quote from the article, "Drinking young people's blood could help you live longer and prevent age-related disease. Blood factors taken from younger animals have been found to improve the later life health of older creatures. The study, published in Nature, was conducted by researchers from University College London, who said it could reduce the chances of developing age-related disorders. Had science finally caught up with what vampires had figured out centuries ago? That the secret to immortality lies in the blood of the living? According to folklore, a vampire is a creature, classically a human, that exists by feeding on the vital essence of the living. This is typically done by drinking the blood of another creature or human. The modern-day aristocratic, alluring, charming, and womanizing vampire was birthed by John Polidori. In 1816, Dr. Polidori, Lord Byron's personal physician, accompanied him on a trip throughout Europe. At a villa rented by Byron near Lake Geneva, Switzerland, the pair met with Mary Goodwin, her husband-to-be, Percy Shelley, and their companion, Mary's sister, Claire Clairmont. On a night in June, after the company had read aloud from Phantasmagoriana, a French collection of German horror stories, Byron, as a means of competition, suggested that they each write and present their own ghost story. The friendly competition that night spawned two infamous monsters, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Polidori's The Vampire, which went on to become the first published modern vampire story in the English language. The story was a huge success and went on to influence Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was loosely inspired by Vlad Dracula or Vlad the Impaler. While Vlad is an interesting character, he's really only a vampire in the sense that he had a thirst for blood. This, of course, made him the perfect inspiration for a blood-sucking monster. John Polidori was not the originator of the vampire myth. In fact, to find the origin of the myth, you would have to go all the way back to Greek myth and the story of Ambrogio and Selen. Ambrogio was a young adventurer. He was born and raised in Italy, and he had always longed to travel to Greece to have his fortune told by the Oracle of Delphi. Delphi was the home of a great temple, the temple of Apollo, the sun god. The oracle would sit in a chamber within the temple and speak of prophecies inspired by Apollo to those who came to seek the oracle's wisdom. When Ambrogio arrived at the temple to speak to the oracle, whose words were often cryptic, said only a few words. The curse, the moon, the blood will run. Ambrogio couldn't sleep that night. He stayed awake outside the temple, pondering the meaning of the oracle's words. As the sun rose, he walked back to town, spying a beautiful woman dressed in white robes walking towards the temple. He introduced himself. Her name was Selen, and she was the maiden of the temple. Her sister was the oracle, so Selen tended to the temple and looked after her sister while in her entranced state. For the next few days, every morning, Ambrogio met Selen at dawn before she started her duties in the temple. Soon, they fell in love. On his last day in Greece, Ambrogio asked Selen to marry him and to return with him to Italy, and she agreed. He said that he would make the preparations and meet her at dawn the next morning outside the temple. Unfortunately, Apollo, the sun god, had been watching. He as well had taken a liking to the beautiful Selen and was enraged that Ambrogio would come to his temple and attempt to take one of his maidens away. At sunset that night, Apollo appeared to Ambrogio, leaving a curse on him that from that day forth, a mere touch of Apollo's sunlight would burn Ambrogio's skin. Ambrogio was distraught. He was set to leave with Selen in the morning, but he would not be able to meet her at sunrise as he promised. Having nowhere else to turn, he ran to a cave and to Hades for protection. Hades, the god of the underworld, listened to his tale and made him a deal. If he could steal the silver bow of Artemis and bring it back, Hades would grant him and Selen protection in the underworld. Hades agreed to give Ambrogio a magical wooden bow and 11 arrows to hunt with. He was to hunt and to offer his trophies to Artemis in order to gain her favor and steal her bow. As collateral, Ambrogio left his soul in hell with Hades until he could return with the bow. Should he return without the silver bow, he would have to live in hell forever, never to return to Selen. Having no other choice, Ambrogio agreed. He wanted to contact Selen and tell her what had happened, but he didn't have any parchments or writing implements. So he took his bow and arrow and he killed a swan. Using its feather as a pen and its blood for ink, he wrote her a note explaining that he could not meet with her, but would find a way for them to be together. He left the note in their meeting place and ran off to find a place to hide from the sunlight. Selen was devastated when she found the note, but kept working at the temple as not to anger Apollo any further. The next morning, Selen went back to their meeting place, but again, Ambrogio was not there. There was, however, another piece of parchment with writing in blood on it. It was a love poem from Ambrogio. For 44 days, Ambrogio slew a swan and used its blood to write Selen a love poem. After draining its blood and using a single feather to write the poem, he offered the swan as a tribute to Artemis, the goddess of hunting and the moon. He hoped that if he could not steal her bow, she would be honored by the tribute and would convince her brother Apollo to remove the curse. On the 45th night, Ambrogio had only one arrow left. He shot it at a swan and missed, the arrow sailing far into the distance. He had neither the blood to write Selen's poem nor the swan to sacrifice to Artemis. He fell to the ground and wept. Seeing how good of a hunter and how dedicated a follower Ambrogio had been, Artemis came down to him. He begged Artemis to let him borrow her bow and an arrow so he could kill one last bird and leave one final note to Selen. Artemis took pity on him and agreed to let him borrow her silver bow and an arrow. He took the bow and in desperation ran to Hades. Artemis, realizing what was happening, cast her own curse on Ambrogio that caused the silver in the bow to burn his skin. Ambrogio dropped the silver bow and fell to the ground in pain. Artemis was furious at his deceit, and he begged for her forgiveness. He explained to her the deal he had been forced to make with Hades, his curse by Apollo, and his love for Selen. He apologized profusely and swore that he had no other choice. Artemis took pity on him again and decided to give him one last chance. She offered to make him a great hunter, almost as great as she was, with the speed and the strength of a god and fangs which he could drain the blood of the beast and write his poems. In exchange for this immortality, he would have to agree to a deal. He and Selen would have to escape Apollo's temple and worship only Artemis forever. The catch was that Artemis was a virgin goddess, and all of her followers had to remain chaste and unmarried. So Ambrogio would never be allowed to touch Selen again. They could never kiss, never touch, and never have children. Ambrogio agreed. He killed another swan and left Selen a note, telling her to meet him on a ship at the docks. The next morning, she found the note and was able to run away before Apollo took notice. Arriving at the docks, Selen found Ambrogio's ship and met him down in the hull. There, she found a wooden coffin with a note on it, telling her to order the ship's captain to set sail and to only open the coffin after the sun had set. She did as the note said, and after sunset, she opened the coffin to find Ambrogio alive and well. The couple sailed to Ephesus, where they lived in a cave during the day and worshipped Artemis at her grand temple at night. They lived happily together for many years, never touching, never kissing, and never having children. After a number of years, Ambrogio's immortality allowed him to stay young, but Selen continued to age as would a normal mortal. She finally fell ill and was on her deathbed. Ambrogio was distraught, knowing that he could not join Selen in the afterlife because of his soul residing in Hades. That night, he went into the woods and found a white swan swimming alone in a small lake. He killed the swan and offered it to Artemis, begging for her to make Selen immortal so that they could stay together forever. Artemis appeared to him. Thankful for his years of dedication and worship, she made him one last deal. Artemis told Ambrogio that he could touch Selen just once, to drink her blood. Doing so would kill her mortal body, but from then on, her blood, mixed with his, could create eternal life for any who drink it. If he did this, Artemis would see to it that they stayed together forever. Ambrogio wanted to refuse, but after telling Selen what happened, Selen begged him to do it. After much convincing, he bit her neck and took her blood into his body. As he set her limp body down, Selen began to radiate with light and raise up to the sky. Ambrogio watched as Selen's glowing spirit lifted to meet Artemis. When she arrived, the moon lit up with a brilliant light. Selen became the goddess of moonlight, and every night she would reach down with her rays of light to the earth and finally touch her beloved Ambrogio. According to vampiric legend and history, Ambrogio went to Florence, Italy, where he created the first vampire clan, recruiting all who were willing to exchange their souls for immortality. The clan grew in size and in strength until infighting created something of a civil war within the clan. Because of this, many vampires left and formed their own clans. What happened to Ambrogio and those who stayed with him is unknown, though many believe that he still resides somewhere in Florence.
What do you mean you haven't heard of paranormalityradio.com? If you listen to paranormal podcasts, or if you're a paranormal podcaster, then Paranormality is a name that you need to know. It's the home of Paranormality Magazine, which features stories, reviews, and interviews with some of your favorite paranormal podcasts. It's also the home of the Paranormal Top 25, which highlights the top 25 paranormal podcasts you should be listening to right now based on listener vote. And the Paranormality Podcast Directory, which has over 300 paranormal podcasts in it for your listening pleasure. Go check us out today at paranormalityradio.com.
While Florence is the most prominent European city related to vampire history and legend, another city in America, New Orleans, is a very close second. On the corner of Ursuline and Royal Street in New Orleans sits a home with a bright red door. In 1902, it would be home to one of the most infamous vampires in the world. In the dark streets of New Orleans, bloodthirsty Jacques St. Germain hid in plain sight as an opulent member of the city elite. Jacques had a mysterious and colored past which he conveniently left behind when settling in New Orleans, where he would lure many young women into his home at their own peril. While Germain moved into the New Orleans mansion in 1902, oddly enough, he was rumored to have been born sometime in the 17th century. Jacques St. Germain claimed to be a descendant of Count St. Germain. The Count was a prolific alchemist during the 1600s. Alchemy was the beginning of modern-day chemistry and specifically looked for ways to transform matter into various materials. More precisely, turning base metals, such as lead, into gold. Another goal of the alchemist was to search for the philosopher's stone, a stone that was believed to grant the wielder immortality. Many believe the Count to be the holder of this stone. Thus, Jacques was not just a supposed ancestor of Saint Germain, but the Count himself. Believing not only to have conquered death, but time as well, the Count has become somewhat of a time-traveling and immortality legend. While records say that he was born in the late 17th century, sightings of the Count can be traced all the way back to the wedding at Cana, where Jesus Christ infamously turned water into wine. He may have even been present for the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Despite records of his death, there are reports of him being seen by historical figures throughout Europe. A few of the notable historical figures who have claimed to have had Count encounters include Voltaire, Casanova, King Louis XV, Catherine the Great, and Franz Anton Mesmer, the father of hypnosis and hypnotherapy. To add to the mystery, New Orleans residents often commented on the uncanny resemblance between Jacques and the Count himself. Whether the Count was a vampire of Ambrogio's creation or not is completely up to conjecture. But one thing is certain, the Count seemed to have a taste for the ladies and for blood. Saint Germain arrived in New Orleans with a bang. Upon moving into the home at Ursuline and Royal Street, he threw a lavish party to announce his arrival. He fit in immediately with the elite, as he was one of the wealthiest and most cultured people in the city. He was charismatic, spoke numerous languages, and told engrossing tales of his adventures. These parties were so engaging to the locals, no one ever thought to question why he was never seen eating any food and only drinking red wine. The French quarter loved him and never thought to question his idiosyncrasies. But Jacques' big time in the Big Easy would be short-lived. It wouldn't be the rumors of his past history that would plague Saint Germain in the end. Instead, it only took one jarring incident to truly immortalize him as the vampire of New Orleans. During one of his extravagant parties, he coerced a young woman into a secluded area of the mansion. Finding herself alone with Saint Germain, she was completely unaware of his true intentions. Soon, he seized upon her, pinning her against a wall. The woman said that Saint Germain then began biting into her neck and drawing blood. Jacques' attack was paused when he was startled by guests who attempted to enter the room. This fleeting moment gave the woman a chance to get away. In her panic, she climbed through a window and onto the second-story balcony, where she jumped to the street below, breaking both of her feet and legs. As she cried out for help, the police arrived, and the woman was taken to the hospital. Jacques' excuse? She was drunk. The police, not taking this justification at face value, told St. Germain to be at the station first thing in the morning. When morning arrived and St. Germain was nowhere to be found, the police immediately went to his home, finding it nearly empty. Jacques had skipped town. Oddly, the police found only a few clues at the home. One was that there was no food, utensils, or any evidence that anyone in the home consumed any sort of tangible food. They also found century-old clothing, as well as several bottles of red wine that was later found to have been mixed with blood. Further inspection of the home by police found several other rooms that appeared to be covered in blood stains. Was Jacques a vampire, an immortal, or just a crazed man? The truth is unknown because no one has ever been able to track down the vampire of New Orleans. According to Michael Murphy's book, Fear Dat, New Orleans, there are ongoing sightings of Vampire Jack in New Orleans. For instance, in 1933, the New Orleans police were called to Royal Street, where for 2 consecutive nights, women were found with their throats torn out and drained of blood. A witness claims to have seen a man scale a 12-foot tall wall effortlessly to make his escape. Whether real or not, vampire superstition thrived in the Middle Ages, especially as the plague decimated entire towns. The disease often left its victims with bleeding mouth lesions, which was a sure sign of vampirism. The signs and symptoms of illness can take years to master, so it wasn't uncommon for anyone with an unfamiliar physical or emotional illness to be labeled possessed or a vampire. Many researchers think porphyria, a blood disorder that can cause severe blisters on a person's skin when exposed to sunlight, is a disease that may have been linked to the legends of vampires. Other diseases blamed for promoting the vampire myth include rabies, goiter, or in the case of Mercy Brown, tuberculosis. Mercy Brown may rival Count Dracula as the most notorious vampire. Unlike Count Dracula, however, Mercy was a real person. She lived in Exeter, Rhode Island, and was the daughter of George Brown, a local farmer. Tuberculosis was a terrible illness, and Edwin Brown was wasting away, and for the better part of 2 years, he grew increasingly thin and weak. By March 1892, Edwin struggled to breathe as he was continually coughing up blood. He had sought a cure in the healing air and mineral waters of Colorado Springs, Colorado, but the 18-month trip offered no healing powers and only left him homesick. Edwin Brown returned home to Exeter, Rhode Island. George Brown had watched helplessly as the disease, commonly known as consumption, took the lives of his wife, Mary Brown, in 1883, followed by his 20-year-old daughter, Mary Olive, 6 months later. While his only son grew weaker and weaker in the winter of 1892, tuberculosis also took his 19-year-old daughter, Mercy, after a year of sickness on January 19, 1892. The disease that took 3 members of George Brown's family was the top killer of its time in the 18th and 19th centuries. Tuberculosis passed easily between people in close quarters, which is why it tended to sweep through entire families such as the Browns. While the disease was all too common for the townspeople of Exeter, what happened next wasn't. In 1892, tuberculosis was still poorly understood. It wasn't widely known what caused the disease or how it spread. Doctors were unable to explain the wave of sickness washing over George Brown's family, but relatives and friends thought they knew where they could find the cause. The group believed that Edwin's mother or one of his sisters may be undead, caught between heaven and hell and sucking the life out of him from beyond the grave. Vampire hysteria gripped the town, and the group insisted that the bodies of the Brown women needed to be dug up to find the cure. With the extremely reluctant blessing of George Brown, his relatives and neighbors visited the Brown family plot in the town's Chestnut Hill Cemetery on March 17, 1892. In the small graveyard behind the town's Baptist church, they exhumed the bodies of Mary Brown and Mary Olive Brown. They opened the caskets and, as would be expected, found only their bones inside. The townspeople then turned their attention to the casket of Mercy Brown, who had died 8 weeks earlier. Accounts differ as to whether Mercy's body had already been buried or if it rested in a crypt until the ground could thaw and undertakers could dig a grave. However, when the lid was lifted on Mercy's coffin, her body was found on her side, her face appeared flush, and there was blood in her heart and in her veins. Dr. Harold Metcalf, who had raised his objection to the entire affair, assured everyone that the lack of decomposition on Mercy's body was perfectly consistent with the fact that she had been dead for less than 2 months. Knowing that medicine had done nothing to save the Browns, the people of Exeter ignored the doctor's proclamations and took the presence of fresh blood in Mercy's heart as a sign that she was undead. They gathered wood and built a bonfire on a pile of rocks nearby. Then they cut out Mercy's heart and lungs and cremated them on the pyre. They returned to Edwin Brown's house with the ashes of his dead sister's heart and mixed them with water. Edwin then consumed the concoction in an effort to cure his disease. Tuberculosis, however, continued to rage him, and he died 2 months later on May 2nd, 1892. This is not the first time the folk remedy of burning the organs of the dead and mixing the ashes into an elixir for the sick had been tried in Rhode Island, even Exeter. In 1799, the townspeople exhumed the body of Sarah Tillinghash, suspecting her of being a vampire. Author Diana Ross McCain reports that there were 18 documented instances of the exhumation of family members in suspected vampire cases throughout New England in the 18th and 19th centuries. But the case of Mercy Brown would be the last. After digging up Mercy Brown, the townspeople buried her heartless body into the ground of Chestnut Hill Cemetery, where she now rests in peace. Fear is a real thing, and in this case, it possessed a rather large group of otherwise sensible folks to exhume, mutilate, immolate, and cannibalize a young girl's corpse to kill a suspected vampire. Imagine with me for a moment that vampires are real and that you are Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Van Helsing. What would you need at your disposal to protect yourself from and destroy them? Fortunately, there is no lack of folklore on either of these two subjects. Some of the most common apotropaics, or items that ward off evil, include garlic. Garlic is a common example, but not the only plant or herb said to be effective. A branch of wild rose or hawthorn is also said to ward off vampires. Sacred items or sacred ground is also thought to be effective. Sacred items such as a crucifix, rosary, or holy water is said to be able to ward off vampires. Vampires are also believed to not be able to walk on consecrated ground, such as that of churches or temples, or crossing running water. Mirrors are also thought to be effective. Although not traditionally regarded as an apotropaic, mirrors are said to be able to ward off vampires. This is because vampires in some cultures do not have reflections or the ability to cast a shadow. This is perhaps just a manifestation of the overall belief that vampires lack a soul. But nonetheless, mirrors, popularized in Bram Stoker's Dracula, have remained a popular staple of vampire folklore, especially with authors and filmmakers. Another popular tradition states that vampires cannot enter into a house unless invited. And as in the case of Ambrogio, sunlight and silver is said to be able to burn the skins of vampires. If you're looking to destroy a vampire, you're probably going to have to look towards staking. Staking is by far the most commonly cited method. Potential vampires were most often staked through the heart, through the mouth, or through the stomach. Piercing was another common way of dealing with vampires. This is part of an anti-vampire burial, which included burying sharp objects such as sickles with the corpse, so that they may penetrate the skin if the body bloats sufficiently while transforming into a vampire. Decapitation was the preferred method in German and Western Slavic areas, with the head buried between the feet, behind the buttocks, or away from the body. This act was seen as a way of hastening the departure of the soul, which in some cultures was said to linger in the corpse. The vampire's head, body, or clothes could also be spiked and pinned to the earth to prevent rising. Other methods, depending upon region, include pouring boiling water over a grave, completely incinerating the body, shooting or drowning a body, repeating a funeral, sprinkling holy water on a body, or exorcism. In Romania, garlic could be placed in the mouth of the body. Potentially, all of these items and techniques should be at your disposal and available in your future vampire hunting kits. Although modern science has silenced the vampire fears of the past, people who call themselves vampires do exist. They're normal-seeming people who drink small amounts of blood in feeding rituals conducted with willing donors. For obvious reasons, most of these feeding rituals are conducted in private. Communities or self-identified vampires can be found on the internet and in cities and towns around the world. Some vampires don't ingest human blood, but claim to feed on the energy of others. Many of these psychic vampires state that if they do not feed regularly, they become agitated or depressed. Today, vampires have become mainstream and have become a topic of many popular films, books, and television shows. All in all, given the fascination people have with all things horror, vampires, real or imagined, are likely to continue to inhabit the earth for years to come. So what do you think? Are vampires real? Can someone's life be extended by drinking blood? Are the elites drinking blood, or as some suggest, adrenochrome, to extend their lives? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us. We'll see you next time. All right, folks, that's the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you listening. If you have enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing through your favorite podcast player. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And remember that if you've had a paranormal experience that you would like to share, you can email us at prairielandparanormalpodcast@gmail.com, or you can submit that experience through our website at www.prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. So, until next time, remember, don't be normal when you can be paranormal.